So, I'll start with so about half an hour I expect to spend on this kind of a review of what has gone on in the last week with respect to the infinite dimensional setup. But of course, the infinite dimensional setup is a generalization of the finite dimension. So, I will try to make that as clear as possible. Okay. So, let us start. So the finite dimensional setup we are clear about, right? We write G and this is a complex semi-simple Lie algebra. And let us recall that to this we can attach a root system. How do you attach a root system? You choose, let H be a Cartan subalgebra. And then you take G and look at it as an H module, and you see that it decomposes like so, where this is some finite set which you call the roots. So, these roots live in H star with the usual notation. So, then these, if you look at so these alphas live in H star. So, this is the set of roots. And the statement is that if you take these alphas, the real span of the alphas, call that just notation H star sub r. This is a real form for H star. That is, when I tensor this with C, I get a natural map into H star, which is an isomorphism. And this has an inner product on it. Namely, you take the Killing form restricted to H, it is an inner product. Restricted to H is non-degenerate. Then you restrict it to the real span of the coroots. That again, the real span of the coroots is a real form of H. So, you can write HR is equal to real span of the coroots is a real form for H. And you take the Killing form restricted to this. This is a real vector space of dimension equal to the complex dimension of H over of H. And so you get an inner product space. So you take this real space with the Killing form, you get an inner product. And living in this inner product or in this inner product space, here you can take the coroots, here you can take the roots, they form a root system. Okay. If you take this root system, this will be the dual root system, okay, not necessarily the same root system. So, normally this one is called the root system attached to this G. Okay. So, this is the algebraic object, this is the combinatorial object, and what we learned during the first week was that there is this, you can form this to form this is interesting in itself. So, you form this and you get this combinatorial object, and the study of this combinatorial object helps you understand this. I will make that even clearer in a minute. So, you have this root system which we studied as an abstract object. Now, what we further studied was that from the root system you can go down to a still more, less information. You can, instead of, this is a lot of information, instead of carrying so much information, you can reduce that amount of information, keep the same amount of information, but reduce it, compress it without lossless compression into what is called a Dynkin diagram. or equivalently a Cartan matrix. By the way, what from G, if you do this procedure, what you get will be a reduced root system. So we will always assume that our root systems are all reduced. Okay, so starting with G, you got yourself a Cartan matrix. Okay, and so this is the definition of this is as follows. It's a non-negative. So n cross n matrix or L cross L matrix. Let me write n, where n is the rank of G, that is the complex dimension of this H, okay, of non-negative integers. So let's call this A. If you recall the definition of Aij, it was defined like this, and this is okay, maybe there is a slight difference between the Bourbaki notation and Humphreys or Katz's notation. This is the Katz's notation. Vishwanath may have followed the Bourbaki notation, in which case it would be alpha j check alpha. But never mind, one of these. So which you can also write as where you can take this to be the killing form. Sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. N cross n matrix of integers, that's the definition. So you have these properties. So what you get immediately is that's one of the properties of simple roots. If you have two simple roots, they have to be they can't be, they have to be perpendicular or obtuse. Okay, and the other thing is j equal to 0. Okay, now so this matrix has these properties. Surely it has more properties. For example, this being a non-degenerate form, and you are choosing a it has further properties which I will just mention, but it definitely has these properties, and any matrix with these properties you call a generalized Cartan matrix. Okay, but maybe I am getting ahead of myself. So let me say the following. So once again, we have started with G and got ourselves some combinatorial data, namely the Cartan matrix associated with this G. Okay. One more important observation here is, of course, here you can take this semi-simple object and semi-simple algebra and break it into its simple components. It has a unique decomposition into not just as isomorphisms, but actually unique decomposition, physically unique, into ideals, each one of which is direct, it's a direct sum of ideals, okay, each of which is simple as an algebra in its own right. Okay. And so the corresponding thing here is the natural thing. You look at this Cartan matrix, it breaks up into a, you know, after rearranging, you can break it up into block diagonal form, and where each one of these blocks that you have is indecomposable in the sense that you cannot further, by rearranging, you cannot break it up into blocks. Okay. So here you can talk about irreducible. So here if you take simple, here you will get irreducible. Since we know that semi-simples can be built out of simples, let us just worry about irreducibles, just to, it's a notational reduction that we do. Okay, we will worry only about irreducible stuff here. Okay. Now, let us ask ourselves the question, if I start with this, look here, I have made a choice and produced something combinatorial, but the remarkable fact is this combinatorial matrix contains all the information about this. You can go backwards. Okay, so from this Cartan matrix, you can produce the G. Okay. Now, there are roughly two ways of sort of doing this. So, one way is the following. To this G, you have attached this Cartan matrix. You might ask, there is a choice here of a Cartan subalgebra. Then the first question is this independent of this choice? Yes, it is independent of this choice, and that we have not stated formally yet. Upendra is going to do it this evening. Okay, so this association is independent of the choices involved. Okay, here further, here there was only the choice of a Cartan subalgebra. Here there was a further choice of a positive system or a simple system or a chamber, all of which are equivalent. Okay, so the choices don't matter. Now, and then you have here a classification of these objects, which Vishwanath did. Okay, so you classify Cartan matrices or Dynkin diagrams, and then you know that then you look at one way of doing this that you can get back is the following. Suppose you start with a Lie algebra and get a Cartan matrix. I start with another Lie algebra, get a Cartan matrix. I will prove that if we end up with the same Cartan matrix, the original things must be isomorphic. So what we are saying is, that is like saying, so here is my semi-simple Lie algebras, and I produce my root systems or Cartan matrices here. So this is up to isomorphism. Okay. Now, one way is to prove that this map is 1, 1 and on 2. Okay. So 1, 1 is the statement that if I take two different Lie algebras and get the same Cartan matrix here, then these Lie algebras must be isomorphic. That's called the isomorphism theorem in Humphreys, okay, which Upendra will talk about. We will not prove it, but that's one way of doing it. That shows that you can essentially go back from here. It does not tell you how exactly to go back, but at least it tells you that the map is 1, 1. Okay, and there is an onto. So this map is also onto. That is, given a Cartan matrix, there is a G it comes from. That's called the existence theorem. Okay, so this map is really an isomorphism. So that's a bijection. This statement, Upendra is going to formally state that. Okay, that is there in Humphreys. So there is the isomorphism theorem and existence theorem, which are the statements that this map is 1, 1 and this map is onto. Okay, that is one level. So we have shown that indeed you can go back. That's one way of doing it. But that is rather unsatisfactory in a sense, because you physically want to get back the algebra from the Cartan matrix, okay, which we have also done, which actually Sripad did on Monday last week, right? And so let us recall what he did. So you start off with, so you try to produce this Lie algebra with generators and relations. Okay, so you write down, so let's start with, so what all information do I have here? I have the dimension of the dimension n, which is the dimension of the Cartan subalgebra. Okay? So I start with H, which is an n-dimensional vector space. I can take, if you want, H1, H2 a basis and do it, but it's convenient to just take a vector space itself. Okay? And what else do I know? I should have some, for each of the simple roots, I know that there is a element in the one of the root spaces and the other root space, etc. So I let me call them EI and FI. Maybe they were called XI and HI, XI and YI. Okay? But these are equal. So I have E1 through En, and I have F1 through Fn. We know what these are. They are the ones in the Lie algebra which should correspond to the living in the simple root spaces and the negative simple root spaces. Okay? And we know the relations, right? So H with, so let's put these relations. Okay? And then I know H with EI is alpha I check on H EI, or let me I should define this in terms of the matrix, right? So I choose so okay, let me choose this to be the span of this, and then I have here alpha j check is A j I, if I got that right. And then I want EI Fj is equal to delta Ij alpha I check. Did I write them all down? Okay. Aha, that I have not written now. Yes, correct. So so these relations hold, right? So if you recall Shipa's lecture, so what we are trying to do is trying to go back, construct this as generators and relations from this data going back to this data, recovering back this G. Okay? Certainly I know by the structure of that Lie algebra that that I've studied. So I'm playing you see what game I'm playing. I know the structure, how it looks. I understand this structure. I'm just trying to figure out if I can deduce it all from this in some very clever and clean fashion. That's what we are trying to do. And surely we should impose these relations. So I impose these relations and I get some algebra. Okay? There are more relations that are true, but for the moment these are the more obvious ones. These relations are definitely true. So let me take an algebra generated by these symbols subject to these relations. Okay? What do I get? I get some algebra which is called G tilde A. And now the point is, you could have done this, there is nothing, you could have taken any matrix and still do this business. So at this point I'm just taking some symbols and taking some relations and going modulo those relations. So I could do this with any matrix whatsoever, and so this is what is called G tilde A in Katz's first chapter. Okay. And now if you see, if you just by using these relations, there is some structure this G tilde A, even this G tilde A has. Namely, you can break it up. See the algebra generated by the Fi's, the algebra generated by the Ei's, and the H, it will have this triangular decomposition that you are familiar with by looking at that. It has a similar kind of triangular decomposition that comes from these relations themselves. So this G tilde A can be written as eta plus tilde plus H this has this triangular decomposition. This is fairly straightforward to see. Okay, this is the usual definition. Eta tilde will be the n tilde minus will be the algebra generated by the Fi's. N tilde plus will be the algebra generated by the Ei's. Okay, and now here is the thing. I will not do it like Sripad did. I will do it differently, which is what Punita did. I am just recalling this. Okay. Fact is that there exists a unique ideal in G tilde A, maximal with respect to the property, with respect to intersecting H trivially. This takes some proving, but never mind. Let's not worry about the proof. Let's just look at the statement. This is a fact. Okay, there exists a unique ideal, maximal with respect to the property that it does not intersect H. Okay, and I go modulo that ideal, and the theorem is that is G. So I have produced G from the Cartan matrix. What do? I put these obvious relations, and then I get a algebra G tilde, and then I take this ideal which is maximal with respect to this property, and then go modulo. So call this what was the maybe this was called R in Katz's notation. So set G A is equal to defined to be G tilde A by this ideal R. So the thing is, if I now the claim is that if I start with this matrix and do this, I get back G. That's the theorem. Okay, so let me state this as a theorem. If A is the CM of a complex semisimple algebra, then GA equals G. But here is the nice thing about this procedure is that you can do this with any matrix, and I can ask the question, do I get something? So I have an analog of a complex semisimple algebra associated not just to any Cartan matrix, but to any matrix whatsoever.
Any matrix means not full rank, but
No, right now there are absolutely no conditions on the matrix whatsoever for this part. At the moment nothing at all. Just it's a n cross n matrix with complex entries, because I have to make sense of these AJIs as complex, maybe over any field, whatever, but at least let's just say at the moment there is no condition at all. You can do this procedure, there is no problem. Whether you get an interesting algebra is a different question, and the point is that, so first point, if this A had lots of structure like it was the Cartan matrix of a finite dimensional algebra, then I get back that finite dimensional algebra. That's one point. Okay, and here is so that is the observation of Katz and Moody, that not just with a Cartan subalgebra, but slightly more general, called generalized Cartan matrix. If you start with this, you get something interesting, and that algebra has lots of structure, and its representation theory has a structure that is similar to or has similarities to the representation theory of that, and you can study this and profitably. Okay. Okay, but so let me say a few things. So this is, we have defined, this is a Cartan, we know what a Cartan matrix is. In addition to this, a Cartan matrix must be positive definite. Yes.
Ideally generated by finite distribution.
I will come to that in a minute. Yes, correct. I will come to that in a minute. Okay. So this Cartan matrix has, in addition to, is equal to GCM plus positive definite. And so in the generalized Cartan matrix, I have just deleted this condition that it be positive definite. It means a generalized Cartan matrix with the positive definiteness condition. Sorry, I'm right. It's abuse of language. CM is GCM conditions plus positive definiteness. That's what I mean. But okay. Now let us observe that it has some further. So we already talked about this. Okay. Now the question is, for which kind of matrices do I get interesting stuff? So there is lots of detail in Katz about this. So let me mention some of this. So if you start with a generalized Cartan matrix, definitely you get something interesting, and that's what Punitha was calling the Katz-Moody. In fact, the word Katz-Moody algebra is applied only if you start with a generalized Cartan matrix. Okay. Now let me take that opportunity to mention what Sachin just mentioned. So in Sripad's talk, this ideal was not mentioned. Instead of this ideal, he put what are called the Serre relations. Okay, and those, let me write those down. So add of, so Serre relations. So did I so it should be the EI weight of EJ. So alpha j acting on the co-root associated to EI, which is alpha I check, and my notation was this. Alpha is acting. Okay, so I should, yeah, it is correct now what I have written. I think I've written it correctly. Oh, even in Humphreys, huh? Ah, okay. Maybe. So this is my definition. Is this Bourbaki? I always get confused. This is Katz's notation. Okay, so this is okay. I'm following Katz. Okay. So there is the question confusion as to what you denote by A ij, whether it is alpha I check alpha j or alpha the other way around. Okay, that's the cause of all this confusion. Okay, so you put these relations, and so this is theorem. See, you should also appreciate some of the history here. See, all this association of root system and backwards, and this existence, this isomorphism dates from 1890s, or definitely more than 100 years old. Okay, but this way of getting back this one, I don't know, maybe this should be attributed to Katz and Moody. So not earlier than that, this fact. Okay, and even this fact, so even this is preceded by Serre's observation that this is theorem Serre. So I'll write it in our language, G tilde A modulo the above relations. And this is his was for equals G when A is CM of complex semisimple Lie algebra G. So this is 1950s or 60s. So I'll say. So a long time elapsed before this was realized that you could go back to G in terms of the generators and relations like so. But another, so this is more like 1970 or another time, a little bit of time before people realized that actually this holds more generally and it is useful to do so. And it's worthwhile studying that. Okay. Okay. Now the question becomes, so what we have done is you can start with any matrix and produce this GA. The question is, of course, if it is a Cartan matrix, I get back my G, so that's interesting. What other kinds of matrices can I use to make it interesting? One is, of course, this generalized Cartan matrix. Okay. And here is the theorem. Another theorem. If A is GCM, then not only if it is CM, but it's GCM, then G tilde A, GA, which I have defined by means of that, is equal to G tilde A by Serre. In other words, you could have written this with A equal to GCM rather than, so whether you do G tilde A by Serre or whether you do G tilde A by this maximal ideal, you get back the same thing. But that takes a little proving. This actually comes in Katz's book very late. It's true, but it is not proved until 9th chapter or so. Okay, but this is a fact. Serre relations, yes. So because see, why do we assume GCM? I guess to make sense, these need to be integers for this to make sense, right? See, for the Serre relations to make sense, I need them to be integers. Okay, so that's, so surely I want them to be integers. So generalized Cartan matrix is always an integral matrix. Okay, now let us observe one more property of this Cartan matrix. It's the symmetrizability of it. So let us recall what is symmetrizability. This Punitha did, but I'll recall now. So A n cross n matrix is symmetrizable if A equals dB with D equals diagonal with epsilon 1 through epsilon n in the, this is standard notation on the diagonals, B n cross n symmetric. Diagonal, these are non-zero. None of them is zero. Okay, that's the definition. Observe that Cartan matrices have that property. What do I take epsilon to be? Epsilon I, you can just take alpha I, this number. And if I multiply or divide by that, if you wish, I mean, or whichever, I should take epsilon I to be 1 over this. So if I remove this, then I will get B, right? If I remove this, and then this is a symmetric thing. So the observation is Cartan matrices are symmetrizable. So if I put this condition, symmetrizability condition, then again I am, still, it's one more property that this thing has. This has, it is symmetrizable, it has these properties, and it is positive definite. So for many of these theorems to be true, sometimes, so we assume symmetrizability sometimes. So for a lot of the representation theory, for example, that Katz does, he needs symmetrizability. That's a assumption on the matrix. Okay, so and as Punitha did in the case of a symmetrizable Kac-Moody symmetrizable algebra, symmetrizable GA. If I get a GA with A symmetrizable, then it has this so-called invariant form and then normalized invariant form. Okay, so let me recall that for you. So if theorem or proposition, if so assume, okay, let me recall that. So let me, A is symmetrizable. Then recall you had this realization of the Cartan matrix. Okay, let's recall what the realization of a Cartan matrix is. If you have a Cartan matrix A, then this I made a mistake, didn't I? Here I have to take here I have to take a bigger space. Sorry. So there is a mistake here. I made, this should be the underlying space of a realization. So let me cut what see, the Cartan matrix is not equal to the dimension of the underlying, it's slightly bigger than the rank of the matrix, right? I mean the dimension of n. See, for example, in the case of the affine case that we have studied, the size of the matrix was, if you call, there is an underlying finite dimensional simple, if that you call L, the size of the matrix is L plus 1 cross L plus 1, and the size of the Cartan matrix is L plus 2. Okay, the original H plus the K plus the D, recall. So it should be the underlying space of a realization, and these are elements inside that H, inside that H. And
The generalized Cartan matrix.
say that again, please.
This is the generalized situation. Yes, in the CM.
So in the case when A is a Cartan matrix, or A is non-singular, then this H will have the same dimension as the rank, as these, yeah, because that comes from the definition of the realization. Okay, this realization is, so H is a vector space of I think I have to take necessarily of dimension, I don't know if that is required, or so A is n by n, L equals rank of A, H is a vector space of dimension 2n minus L, alpha pi check is by definition certain set of linearly independent, n linearly independent, where n is the size of A, linearly independent elements in H, and pi is alpha 1 through alpha n linearly independent elements in H star. And Aij, the matrix will be given by alpha ij, alpha I check acting on alpha, such that. So this is also an assumption that, or does it follow the dimension of H to be? It's an assumption. It's an assumption. Okay. In any case, that's okay. That's the realization. Okay. So what you can do, if if it is symmetrizable, the point is, it looks, what is the use of this symmetrizable symmetrizability? It allows me to put a certain symmetric non-degenerate bilinear form on H. That's the magic. So it allows me to put a symmetric bilinear form on H, which I can then lift to an invariant form on G. I will explain this. So if I'm in this situation, then I can put a bilinear form on H as follows. So what is this form on A? So A is symmetrizable, then this is a realization. Then you define as follows. So define, okay. I always forget the choices until I come to them. Choose H double prime complement to this space in H. Okay, never mind the details, just follow it formally. Okay, H is some vector space of some big dimension in which these co-roots are sitting. They will be the co-roots. They are linearly independent, so they span an n-dimensional subspace of H. Okay, there is a n minus L extra dimension there. So you choose some complement, call it H prime, H double prime. Okay. Now I define a certain form on H using this data. What I do is, on this is an n-dimensional, on this n-dimensional space with the other being any element, I define it to be like this. Epsilon I refers to this epsilon I, alpha I refers to the element there. Acting on H is the standard, I mean this is alpha I acting on H. Okay. And on H double prime it is 0 and it is symmetric. So these define the form fully. Okay. And the exercise, if you work that exercise out, it says it is non-degenerate. Remember last time we gave you a matrix with symmetric, it had some conditions on it. If you work that exercise, it will tell you it's a good linear algebra exercise to do. It is non-degenerate. Okay. Now the point is there now. So again notice that there are some choices here. I have chosen a symmetrization because these epsilon i's depend on the symmetrization. I have chosen a complement. There are some choices, but never mind, you fix some choice and do it. Okay. So what I get is a symmetric bilinear form, non-degenerate bilinear form on H. Okay. And here is the theorem. Given the above form on H, there exists unique invariant non-degenerate form on GA that lifts okay, just see if you understand, if the words are clear. GA. See, H is also a sub of GA because of the way, see, G tilde is the bigger algebra. It is only an auxiliary algebra. It is not of much interest. H also sits inside GA because this ideal does not intersect H. So that's sort of intuitive, at least. It's clear that H will sit inside. See, H sits inside G tilde A, and then there is a map to GA. So this image I can identify with H because this kernel does not intersect H. Okay. So this is in Katz's chapter 2. Okay. This is the use of the symmetrizability, that in fact you can get a invariant non-degenerate form. Now why do you need this? Because you see, in many of the calculations that you did, for example, the Casimir, to construct the Casimir, you needed an invariant bilinear form, which the Killing form naturally provided. Here you can't talk of the Killing form. You need some substitute, and that is why this is that substitute. Okay? So this is the main theorem in Katz's chapter 2. I mean, there are other things, but the point is that you have this form. If it is symmetrizable, then you can do this, choose this, and then you have this unique. Once this is given, this is unique, and it's invariant in the sense of this associativity, or we understand what invariant forms are. Non-degenerate form, and it has the property, you can prove that just like in the property of the Killing form, if you have a root space, it is orthogonal to everything except its negative. See, B of G alpha, G beta is equal to 0 unless alpha plus beta equal to 0. It will have all these properties, and that once it is unique, and it will have all those nice properties. Okay, okay. Now let us. If you started with the Cartan matrix, then the realization, of course, will nothing to add. There will be only H, and you could have taken this to be the this will be nothing but the usual killing form up to scaling. Assuming, of course, I mean, if you had more than one simple factor, you could scale it differently, but modulo that, it is just the killing form. Okay. Now let us, okay, let me maybe start talking about the Casimir a little bit. Because that is required for, it's another thing that is done in Katz's chapter 2, and it's another thing that is required for the representation theory of these algebras, the Kac-Moody algebras. Okay? But we also used it for in the finite dimensional case. So let us recall how we did it in the finite dimensional case, and then I'll sort of give you an idea of how it is constructed and what its properties are. Okay? So how is it? So finite dimensional, so let's review finite dimensional case. What is it? Okay, do you remember the definition? Yeah, but so you, okay, so let me start with, so here as Padma is correctly pointing out, we started with any representation V and tried to define the Casimir. But let us do it a little more as Venkatesh was trying to point out, and I was refusing to listen to him, but he was right, of course. And you can do this just for the adjoint representation. Okay, and so let us do it just for the adjoint representation. Okay. And if you, so what was the definition? If you have a non-degenerate, you fix a non-degenerate form, say the killing form in this case, then you take a basis of the Lie algebra, any basis, take the dual basis, take sigma ui sub u sub I, u upper I. Okay. So that defines, now why that looks like it is dependent on a choice of your basis, but it does not, because actually it represents, if you interpret it correctly, it represents the identity in the endomorphism of G. Okay. So that's the, so oh, let me be bold and write just this. This is what we wrote, right? Ui, where Ui is a basis of G and Ui dual to Ui with respect to killing form. Or some, okay, actually even, okay, a little more. See, somehow the killing form is not correctly scaled. So, in fact, if you remember, Punita talked about a normalized invariant form in the case of the affine, at least in the case of the untwisted affine. Okay. So, what you do is you scale it so that the form on the long root becomes 2. Okay. Keep that in mind. You will see that right now I will say with respect to killing form, but I will change this to, I will correctly scale it and call it normalized invariant form. We will just review what that normalized invariant, it is just a scaling of the killing. Okay. What are its properties? Why should one look at the Casimir? it's in the center of the universal enveloping algebra. So Casimir so C, or what is the notation? This is Katz's notation. So we'll use that, omega. Is in the center of UG. So on any irreducible, finite dimensional irreducible representation, it acts as a scalar. Right, because it belongs to the center, so it commutes with all the elements of G. Okay. Now let us try to do something similar in this case. What will I get? What can I try to do? I can mimic that. I have a, it's a non-degenerate form. So I can choose these bases and write down the dual basis and try to write the operator. Okay. You will run into some kind of problems with this. Okay. So for lack of time, I will not worry about what kind of problems you will run into, etc. Okay. What I will instead do is write directly what Katz writes and then sort of rationalize it, why it is written that way, and see why in the finite dimensional case you could have written it that way too. Okay. So here is what Katz writes. So I will explain the now in deference to Katz, I will write the summation. I would have preferred to omit it, but he writes the summation, so I will also write it. Oh, these UIs are not to be confused with these UIs for the moment. It looks complicated, but you will see that it's, once you get the idea that it's, you have to somehow write something finite dimensional which generalizes correctly, it's not too hard to see why one would want to write this. Okay, just for the moment it is just notation. Now let me explain bit by bit why it is written that way. Okay, now think of this as three parts. Here we of course wrote where UI is a basis of G and UI dual in the normalized inner. Now again I can break up this G into H, N and N minus and try to write basis which is of those individually and try to get the dual basis. What will happen? H is dual to itself. Okay? So this part is the H part. So these UIs are basis for H and U upper I's are the basis for H. So that part there is no change. So somehow these two account for the positive and the negative part. Now let us look at this. Okay. Forget that there is a 2 for the moment. Okay. That 2 is because of the scaling. Okay. The 2 comes because of the scaling, but look at this. Forget this summation. If I have alpha bigger than 0, E minus alpha S, E alpha S. This S is because the root spaces aren't one dimensional anymore. So what I am assuming here in this notation that E alpha 1, E alpha something dot dot dot, E alpha 2 are a basis for G sub alpha or GA sub alpha, the root space GA sub alpha, and E minus alpha 1, E minus alpha 2 are the dual basis in G A minus alpha. So, I am assuming here what I just stated here, that just like the Killing form, the positive part and the negative part will be paired. Okay? So, the dual of that you can identify with the negative. So, with this notation, well, this is, forget the 2 and forget, I mean, this is just this is just that. I have written maybe the other, okay, maybe it doesn't matter. So, let me write it like that to be. So, E alpha S, E minus alpha S. Okay? So, this is just the natural stuff. So, where is this coming from? That is the question, right. So, for that, instead of giving the proof, let me just work you through the SL2 case and convince you that you will, if you see the other part, what should you write? You should write E alpha S, E minus alpha S. You should write that, right. So, let us look at the SL2 and write this and write that and see what happens. What would this say? This says 2 times, okay, what is rho and what is nu inverse? Okay. Rho is the element in H star which is variously described as half. So, this would be in the finite dimensional case what Chandamare called half sum of the okay, but that description is not good for us because the sum is infinite. Okay. Instead, we will use the other description, and at the moment I do not know the proof that they are both the same, but maybe that can be left, that is an exercise to do. This is also the sum of the fundamental weights. Okay. So, this is equal to, so is characterized by rho on alpha, I mean, I have been writing like this, equal to 1 for I between 1 and n. So, in our situation, rho is an element of H star. It is going to take value 1 on alpha 1 check, alpha 2 check, alpha n check. Now, these are certain linearly independent elements in H. Now, H has some very big dimension. I am specifying the images of n elements in H. It should be 1 on this, 1 on this, 1 on this. That is hardly enough conditions to specify rho completely. So, in the infinite dimensional case, as Kath says, there are many choices for rho. Any of them will do. So, rho is not uniquely determined, but not characterized by, but not uniquely. But not, so sorry, that may be bad English. If it is characterized, that means it is uniquely, but meaning defined by, but not uniquely. But not uniquely in the infinite dimensional case. Okay, you choose some rho, and what is this nu inverse? Nu inverse, I think many people use this notation. You pull it, see, I want an element of H rather than of H star. So, this is defined as an element of H star, pull it back by the form to H. So, you get some element. That is how it is written. Okay. Now, let us see, like I said, to understand this, why it is written, let us look at the SL2 case, and I will try to convince you that this is the right thing to, somehow the right thing to write. Okay. So, what is it in SL2? Does anyone remember? Of course, depending on the representation, but again up to scaling they are all the same. xy plus yx plus, very good, plus half h square. Now, tell me which of these is this, which, never mind the scaling. So, let us maybe write it as, no, let it stay as it is. Let us see which one is which. So, let us take the, instead of the Killing form, I take the trace form on the standard representation. So, in fact, that is the Casimir associated to the standard representation. right? Now, this looks like this, doesn't it? Except for the 2. Yeah? This looks like this. So somehow this part should give me the 2 here and this part. So let's work it out. So so maybe I'll put, to make it more, I'll take 2 times that. Let me take 2 times that to make it. Let me put a 2 here and erase this. So this part, where was I? This part is this. Even now up to 2, with the 2. This h square is precisely this. Is that correct or no? Not quite, because h with h is 2. Not quite. So indeed I don't want a 2 there. So let me go back. Sorry, I'm going back and forth, but so now this part is this part. This part looks like this, except that I have to explain the 2, and this xy somehow gives rise to that. So let's just write that. xy is yx plus h. Right? So I could have written this instead as 2yx plus h square over 2. And look, this is 2yx here. This is h square over 2 here. And this I claim is h. Why is that? So I want the element. So what is rho? What is nu inverse of rho? Is the element that when I inner product with h gives me 1. When I inner product h with itself, what do I get? 2. So what is rho? H divided by 2. So what is 2 nu inverse rho? It's h. So that's h. So this is indeed h. And if you ask me, this is good enough for you to do it in general. I mean, the general works, computation works in a similar fashion. Okay? So the point being, this again will have this property, not quite stated this way. I will state it as Cart states, but this is somehow the correct way to write it if you are interested in the infinite dimensional situation. There is a reason why. It will become apparent in a minute when we define what are called restricted modules or integrable modules, etc., where what you want is somehow you don't want where you don't want the y's on the right, you only want the x's on the right. Okay, that is this term. You don't want the reverse term somehow, you don't want it. Of course, it's x's and y's. You could have worked with the y's instead of the x's, that's true. But you all want either the x's or the y's. So we have made a choice of the x's. So it's for some reason you want only the x's. That will become clear. Okay, what else did I want to say? There was one more thing I wanted to say. Why you don't want there is another reason why you don't want the y's on the right. And that comes up because of, let me use that opportunity to review one more bit, which Sendamarai did in the last class and probably he will do today. He was talking about the Harishchandra homomorphism from the center of the universal enveloping algebra to, so he wrote something like this. from the center of the universal enveloping algebra, he defined a homomorphism to the symmetric algebra, the universal enveloping algebra of H, or which is the same as the symmetric algebra because H is commutative. Okay. What is that map? That map, if you recall, the way he defined it is you choose a set of positive roots, some ordering, and then using PBW, you write your given element of UG or of center of UG in terms of the PBW theorem in that. There the y's all appeared on the left, the x's on the right. That was the way it was written in that. So, if you, for example, this is not a good form when you want to use the Harish-Chandra homomorphism. This is the better form because the x's are all on the right. And what was this map? This map is take that element and take it to the pure H term. So, this would map this element, this Casimir would map to H plus, so here the Casimir under the Harish-Chandra homomorphism would map to H plus H square over 2. Okay. Now, the point there is under the Harish-Chandra homomorphism, it should map to the Weil group invariants. See, if you just map this, you are not getting, see, Weil group invariants would be, it should be invariant under H being replaced by minus H. This obviously is not, this term is not invariant. That is why you apply one more, you sort of see it as being replaced by H being replaced by H minus 1. So, you write this, for example, so replace and then write it. So, then what do you get? So, let me rewrite this. This is 2 H plus H square 1/2. So, that is H plus 1 whole square by 2 minus 1/2. Okay. Now, if I replace H by H minus 1, lo and behold, this becomes only H, and that is and then that is invariant under W. Okay. So, this is some way, this way of writing it is better than this, and that is what is used in Katz as well. Okay. So, now let me write down the theorem in that's relevant. So, proposition, if V is a restricted, I will define this GA module, then gamma commutes with the action of GA only. See, never mind for a minute what is restricted, but this is the point of, see, this is the analog of this statement. The category of modules that we will be interested in will be restricted, whatever that means. And we have shown these, what this is saying is gamma commutes with the action of GA on V. Okay. And then if you have reason to believe, of course, then still you cannot see gamma is a scalar still. There is a problem because unlike in the finite dimensional case, you are not assured of eigenvalues. Okay. But most of the objects that we will be discussing will have highest weights, which will be a substitute for eigenvalues, and then Schur's lemma will hold in that context. Okay. So, this along with Schur's lemma, with the context in which Schur's lemma will hold, will assure that the Casimir will act as a scalar. Okay? That is the point. Okay. So now let us define what is restricted. Restricted means that given V in V, there exists only finitely many positive root spaces that do not kill V. See, for this to make sense, what do you want? This is an, this is an infinite sum. Of course, for each, once you choose an alpha, this S is a finite sum, because we know that the root spaces are finite dimensional. That we know. Okay? But this could be a potentially infinite sum. So you put the condition that only finitely many of these, I mean, as an operator, this will make sense. It's an infinite sum, but it will, as an operator, it will make sense. That's a condition. That, okay? And this I won't do. This I will not prove. I mean, it will take too long to prove this. But I hope you get the point. So you write an operator like that, and just like we sort of did it in the SL2 case and then believed it in the other cases, finite dimensional case, some easy calculation, routine calculation, perhaps done with ingenuity. You have to write it down in the correct form. If you write it down, it becomes easier or gives you more insight. That may be, but nevertheless, it is easy to do, and it's a check, and you come up with this. Okay. Now the point is, so this is the second chapter of Katz. That is, the main thing here is he defines this invariant form, which takes the place of the killing form, and for that you need the symmetrizability condition. Okay, and then you define this Casimir and prove this property. Okay, and for a few other properties, but this gives you the idea of what it is used for. Now, next you use this Casimir, just like we did in the finite dimensional case, to prove complete reducibility in the appropriate context. You have to state it correctly. You prove, to prove and to understand the further the representation theory of the Kac-Moody algebra. Okay. Okay, let's see what else okay, let me jump to, I have almost run out of time, but let me try to recall, jump to chapter 9 of Katz and start the representation theory of the Kac-Moody algebra. I can erase this. The nice good news here is that many of the finite dimensional stuff works verbatim. Okay, so this highest weight modules, Verma modules, etc. I can just write the theorems and say, wave my hands. In fact, the proofs are they are not just analogous, they are literally the same. You can just take that proof and write it here and it will work. Okay? So, so let me recall, the important thing here is what is called category O. Okay. So what is the statement of complete reducibility in the finite dimensional case? We say a finite dimensional G module is completely reducible. Now the problem is, how do you say finite dimensional module? See, if you remove see, it's not true for any module. You have to put that finite dimensional condition. Now in the infinite case, the problem is how do you define the hypothesis on the module? You can't say a finite dimensional module because that's not interesting. That will exclude very many interesting modules. Okay. So what you want is some way of saying replacing finite dimensional, and the correct thing to say is integrable category O. That is the correct, or a correct thing, not the correct thing perhaps, but definitely a correct thing is to say integrable category O. Or O int. So what the statement in Kath says that an integrable module in category O is the sum of irreducible modules. In fact, he says a module in category O is integrable if and only if it is a sum of irreducible modules. That's the way it's stated. Okay, this is the statement of complete reducibility that we want. So for that, we need to be able to define this category correctly. So what is this category? First we will define O, and then, so there are two things. There is O on the one side, there is integrable on the other side. In both categories there are objects that are interesting which are not in the other category. These are both interesting categories, and when I intersect them I get O int. Okay, so let us recall category O. This already Punita did. Okay. Category O is interesting. The same definition holds in the finite dimensional case, and it is interesting, and it is more than the finite dimensional modules. Okay, so and by the definition is the same as in the finite dimensional case. That is H diagonalizable So it's a full subcategory. By which, what do I mean? I mean I'm going to define certain modules, and morphisms between these modules will be all GA module morphisms. Okay? Only the modules themselves will be, the objects themselves are restricted. Only certain objects are allowed. It's H diagonalizable, finite dimensional weight spaces. So if it's H diagonalizable, I can write this V as direct sum of V lambda or V mu, the weight spaces. Okay, finite dimensional weight spaces, and the weights. Okay, so PV be the set of weights. That is those lambda in H star for which the weight spaces are non-zero. That's by definition the set of weights. PV is contained in this for some lambda 1 through lambda k, where what I'm just recalling this definition. D lambda by definition is all mu in H star lambda minus mu is equal to an alpha alpha. You can just take the simple ones if you want. Okay, that's the definition. So this is a rather, I mean, technical definition, admittedly technical definition. Okay. But it's a very useful one. And see this definition, as you can see, what does it say? Okay, let's see what it says. Can someone tell me what this says in the SL2 case? So it's H diagonalizable. So this module is, I can break it up into weight spaces. So I take my usual line. It's actually a complex line, but let me write it as a real line. Never mind. Okay. So the weight spaces are, okay, or but why don't we write? This is suppose H star. That's the picture of H star. And with every point I associate the corresponding weight space. right? And the weight spaces are distributed all over this complex plane. What does this say? They are finite dimensional weight spaces, which means with every point the space associated is finite dimensional. And moreover, this condition is true. What does that mean? There are finitely many lambda 1 through lambda k. So there is lambda 1 here, lambda 2 here, lambda 3, lambda 4, something like that, such that the set of weights, the places where the non-zero modules occur, are such that they have that property. What does that mean in the case of SL2? I am allowed to only subtract 2. See, that is just lambda minus mu is an even integer. That's what it means. So the picture will look, this is lambda 1, this is lambda 1 minus 2, lambda 1 minus 4, this is lambda 2, lambda 2 minus 2, lambda 2 minus 4, and so on. So there are finitely many these boundary points such that the weight spaces, the distribution of the weight spaces, non-zero weight spaces, looks like this. That's what it means. Okay, it is clearly a technical condition. It is made for the theory to work. Okay, so and the reason is not difficult to guess. We have chosen x's somehow as positive and y's as negative. You could have done it the whole way upside down. You could choose, you know, such that all the weight spaces are the other way. Starting with a lambda, they are lambda plus 2, lambda plus 4. And why lambda plus 2, lambda plus 4? The reason is simple. If V is a vector with weight lambda, if I apply y to it, I get a vector of weight lambda minus 2. That's the reason. So that's how the weight space, that's what this means. Okay. So, so then the other thing, exactly as Punita defined, I should stop. I'll stop. So there is the notion of the highest weight module. Right? What is the highest weight module? And I will stop with that. So the thing here is O is stable under sub quotient finite direct sum and tensor product. So essentially it says if something is semi-simple, see if you have a semi-simple operator, then on subs and quotients the operator continues to be semi-simple. That's essentially what's involved in the proof. Okay, or maybe a little more, I don't know, but it's anyway it's a good exercise to check. It doesn't involve anything except simple linear algebra. Okay, so then the next thing is the highest. This is the next notion. This is defined exactly as in the case of the finite dimensional situation, where you have a weight module, weight one vector, which is killed by all the x's. It is a weight vector for h, and the module is generated. It's a cyclic module generated by that vector. Okay, and then similarly as in the finite dimensional case, there is a universal such object. Given a weight, there is a universal such module, which is called the Verma module. Again, you can define it similarly, and for the same reason, it will have exactly similar properties. Okay, and then it is quite easy to show from there that and that will belong to this category. It is easy to see that that object belongs to this category. Okay, and so from that very easily we will get that the irreducibles in this category O are precisely there is one irreducible for every weight in H star, not just integral, for every weight in H star, there is an irreducible object, okay, which is the unique quotient of the Verma module. This is a very rather trivial statement. There is no, it has no depth in it. Okay, it's just a very formal statement. From there, we have to talk. Okay, I still haven't talked about integrable modules, next time I will state the Kurzweil character formula. I will skip the proof of that. I will try to write down some formula and make maybe 1 or 2 calculations or give you some idea of why it might be interesting. And I will talk a little bit of the Weil group, and that will be the end of my lectures, and Vishwanath will take over the baton from me. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. So at 11:15, Sendamare will start talking about the Weil character formula, not the Kurzweil character formula.